Welcome to the next episode of FieroCast. Tonight, we are going to be talking with Kristina Kahn from Michigan. Kristina has been involved with the Fiero community for many years now, and we want to see what makes her like Fieros and what got her into the Fieros. I am your host, Mike Royer, and you are listening to the newest episode of FieroCast, the only podcast dedicated to the Pontiac Fiero and the Fiero community. You can find past FieroCast episodes at fierofocus.com or on our Facebook page. We would like to thank our FieroCast supporters for this 2022 season, the Fiero Store, Rodney Dickman, Bonter Solutions, the Midwest Fiero Clubs, and GoldenEye Graphic, as well as the N.I.F.E store. All right, before we jump into the conversation with Kristina Kahn, this episode of FieroCast is brought to you by the Fiero Store and the Midwest Fiero Clubs. So let's take a minute to listen to what the Fiero Store and the Midwest Fiero Clubs has to offer you and the rest of the Fiero community. We know how hard it is to find Fiero parts. We also know that as years go by, finding parts isn't going to get any easier. The big box stores will never make new Fiero parts because our community is just too small. This is why we need to support the companies that support us. For nearly 30 years, the Fiero Store has sponsored our club events, provided free technical support, and produced well over 150 exclusive parts that no big box store would even consider. So, next time you need Fiero parts, head over to thefierostore.com and browse through thousands of products that are specifically designed for your Fiero. That's fierostore.com, the world's largest source of Fiero parts. Have you asked yourself, what is the Midwest Fiero Clubs? Well, the Midwest Fiero Clubs, which is also a region of the AACA, is a dedicated group of enthusiasts whose passion is to promote and preserve the Pontiac Fiero and the Fiero community. The Midwest Fiero Clubs consists of members from existing Fiero clubs across the U.S. The Midwest Fiero Club's intent is to support member clubs and promote the Fiero-related events that they offer. The intent is to enable enthusiasts to discover events in their areas other than their own, and to warrant participation. This has created a tighter-knit Fiero community of the owners and created some great regional shows that may not have otherwise happened. So, how do I find out about them? You can visit the website at midwestfieroclubs.aaca.com or just Facebook them at Midwest Fiero Clubs AACA and like them. All right. Well, thank you for joining me tonight.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
All right. So let's get started. Thank you for joining me tonight on FieroCast. This is our almost 30th episode, talking with Kristina Kahn from Michigan. And we're going to get to know her a little bit, why she got into Fieros and what she looks forward to while having her Fieros. So let's start right away. How long have you been in, well, maybe start before that. What was it about the Fiero that drew you into it?
So initially, what really drew me to the Fiero, at the time I had no mechanical knowledge. So the thing that really stuck out to me was the headlights, just like how they went up and down.
So the body style and the flow of the way it the curves and stuff. Now, do you have GTs or notchbacks?
Mine are all GTs right now. Although I like the notchback too. I just happen to end up with GTs.
When did you get even start looking and getting involved with the Fieros?
So that in itself is a bit of a story, because when I was younger, getting into driving, I actually did not want to drive. I did not like cars. I had no interest. So before I even was into just the Fieros, I was learning how to drive. To get my license, I needed to get hours, and I had no interest in that. I did not want to get my hours. I remember my parents, trying to drag me in the car, like, hey, we got to get hours. Otherwise, I'm not going to get my license, because without the hours, I mean, you need the hours to get the license, really. So,
Exactly.
yeah. So I would basically be forced into the car, and I started driver's training early. So, like, it wasn't like a huge rush to me initially anyway. But it was pretty much all on my parents at that point, because I was fine being driven around everywhere. I just had no interest in cars. I didn't even know the makes or the models. I knew what a car was. Um, and then I remember one of the times when me and my dad were out driving. He was just had to get some hours. We were driving through the country a little bit on some back roads, and there was an old 80s Pontiac Firebird. And my dad wanted to stop and look at it. And we stopped and looked at it, and I thought it was actually kind of cool. And it was like the first experience I even had with the Pontiac. And we just stopped, we looked at it, and then I didn't really think much of it. And then I remember we went back the next day and looked at it again, and we even talked to the guy, and we took it around for a drive. And I remember it smelled kind of old, and the interior was kind of beat up. And I don't know, I thought it was kind of cool, but I wasn't really like taken on it, because I still wasn't really into the car thing. It seemed like a mess to me. And so we didn't really follow up on anything on that. The first car I was really interested in was the Mustang, and that was only because of the name, because I like horses. So I was really into the Mustang for a while. And I remember my dad and we did look at a Mustang, and I passed on it, but just trying to get my bearings. I'm trying to remember. That was only a few years ago, and it feels like so long ago. So basically, I started driver's training in 2015. I was 14 years old. As I mentioned, I was not into getting my hours, not interested in cars. But as I approached becoming 15, I was kind of getting excited to get my license. Like, the whole first car thing, that's pretty exciting. And I kind of like the idea of like, oh, I could have my own car. So as I mentioned, I first liked the Mustang, and then I kind of got to know the Firebird a little bit. I like that because of the name as well, because I like chickens. So I was thinking Firebird and chickens. But I haven't really liked cars for what they were. I just like them because of their name. It wasn't until it was early 2015, probably the spring, I started a new TV show called How I Met Your Mother. And in one of those episodes, they featured a Fiero. And that was the first time I've ever heard of a Fiero. I saw a Fiero, and I remember looking it up on Google, and I didn't really like what it looked like at first, because like the first few pictures were, some notchbacks at weird angles, and I thought they looked like door wedges or something. I was kind of like, eh. But there was something about it though that still stuck with me. So even though I didn't like it at first, I would look them up on Craigslist, and I was like, oh, this is kind of nice, and I like the headlights on it. But I still wasn't interested in driving. I just liked looking at them. And eventually I somehow convinced my dad to look at a couple Fieros, and they were all, they were kind of dingy. They were rusty. I remember the one was a old black notchback. It was like sunken in the mud. And I remember there was also a white 84 up the road that was for sale. I remember we stopped and looked at it, and my dad's like, you sure you'd even want one of these? It's so small. And it was very small. And I just, even though I still wasn't like taken on them, I still had like a weird interest in them. And that was the one car I kept coming back to. Like, I mean, like I said, I like the Mustangs and the Firebirds. I kept coming back to the Fiero.
When you going back to the Firebirds, looking at those compared to the Fiero, did you like that it was smaller? Because I know with the Firebirds, I mean, they're longer. There's more room in there. The front end's a lot longer, but again, a lot of people get deceived about that because of the dip down of the nose. Usually when you're both in the Fiero and the Firebird, even the Camaros, when you're sitting in the driver's seat or passenger seat, you really can't see the nose of the car compared to some of the cars. Now, going back and looking at that, so you got that, the Firebird and the Fiero, did you like that it was smaller, or did you think that was a little odd going from a car that you've known, even like the Mustangs, those are pretty big cars, down to a car that, not as small as a Geo Metro or Tracker, but something a lot smaller?
Yeah, I think that is a good point. I don't think the size affected me too much because I'm only like 5'4", and like to me, whenever I'm in my Fiero, I always have the seat almost at the steering wheel, and it's a bit ridiculous, I think. And even when if my dad ever gets in it or something, he always like hits his head on the roof or the steering wheel because I have the seat so close. So I don't think that affected me necessarily. I think it was anything, it was concern for my parents because the car is very small. Like, I mean, compared to any other car on the road, it's like always half the size. Yeah, that was not my first concern, I guess, with the car. Definitely with my parents, though. And I remember, especially as I got into them more, I would like, like look up like are Fiero safe? And then I found out that they were like the second safest car compared to like Volkswagen. And I still
Mhm.
think my parents had a hard time believing that, like no airbags or anything. They were kind of like, eh.
Yeah, well, they also passed all the crash tests as well. So I mean, they are a pretty safe car if you look at them, and they have good safety built into them as well.
Mm-hmm.
When did you guys, or when did you pull the trigger on your first Fiero then?
Okay, so I started watching How I Met Your Mother early 2015, and it wasn't until that fall I started to kind of convince my dad to like look at Fieros. And the first few we looked at were all, like I said, they weren't too good. And then the winter came, and really we looked at nothing. And then as we got into 2016, I started to get a bit more serious about it because I was like getting closer to, taking my final driver's test and doing all that. So it wasn't until 2016 I got a lot more serious about it. And we got to the point where we probably looked at 6 Fieros, and I was still remember looking at them, and I was still not into the whole driving a car thing. I still wasn't 100% on that. And I was like, well, I could just get a Fiero and look at it because I like looking at it. So if we get a Fiero, it doesn't need to be a good Fiero. I could just keep it in the yard and look at it, maybe sit in it. I don't need to drive it though. So I was still like not in the whole driving phase, which is a bit silly. And I remember my parents are both trying to get me away from the Fiero. I mean, it's not practical, it's small. They pretty much are all projects. And we looked at some cars that were for sale locally. One was a Corvette, and another one was also a Mustang. And my parents they were serious. Like, I mean, if you really want either of these cars, I'm not sure how the Corvette even came into the picture because that seems even less practical than a Fiero. Uh, my dad, he thought it was a really cool car. I think that's why he was really interested in it. And then I remember when we were looking at them, I mean, the guy was willing to negotiate, but I had the back of my head, I was like, well, I still want a Fiero. I don't really want either of these cars. So we passed. And it wasn't until, so then that whole year passed, 2016, still didn't have a car. I had passed like my driver's test, but I couldn't get a license until I was 16. So I was kind of in that like weird stage where I couldn't like legally drive, but I had passed my tests again, mainly at the encouragement of my parents because I still wasn't really into it. And it was 2017 where I still wanted to get the Fiero thing, but my dad's like, well, we've looked at all these Fieros, they all really aren't in good shape. So it was in April of 2015, we looked at this Burgundy 87 GT. And this is the one I was probably we were most serious about at first because it ran and drove, but it needed like brake lines. And I mean, I liked the color on it. We even brought the trailer out to look at it because we were, I mean, getting to be that serious. I kept bugging my dad about it, and he was, I think, just getting sick about the whole ordeal. And my dad wasn't really sold on this Fiero. I really liked it. It ran and drove, like I said, but it was a project. So I remember sitting in Spanish class, and I was messaging the guy like, "Hey, can we come pick it up today?" And my dad was still hesitant. He's like, "Well, before we go get this red one, I found this black one on Craigslist." And it was a listing I had seen before. It was one of those listings that had just a collage of pictures and like it was kind of vague too. And I just kind of skip over listings like that because I mean, it's the whole collage of pictures. You couldn't really zoom in. It just and the price seemed higher too than what you were looking for. I was kind of looking in like the $1,000 range for Fieros, which doesn't really get you the best Fiero. And this one was listed at 2,500, so I thought it was just a bit out of the range. But my dad insisted we go look at it. So instead of looking at that red one that night, we went out to go check out this black one. And it was like 40 minutes away. We took the trailer as well. The car was just sitting out in front of this house. So apparently it belonged to this guy's dad who had it for a few years, and it pretty much just sat in the garage. It originally was from California and kind of floated around Michigan, but you could tell it was never driven in the winter because there was no rust on it. The paint was gone though. It must have sat in the sun a lot. But even though it had sat for many years, it started right up. We drove it around the block. It had low miles, 52,000. It was an automatic, which I preferred at the time. And I remember discussing with my dad. I was sitting on the curb behind the car, and he was like, "Well, this is it. This is the best Fiero we've seen. I would support you if you wanted this car, but it is going to be a project." And I still didn't know if I even wanted a project because I never even knew how to change a tire. I still was even learning like anything about a car, like oil changes, any of that. And like it was pretty overwhelming for me because it was still a big decision. It wasn't just getting the Fiero, or you could just sell the Fiero. My dad had offered his car up to me, which was a 2008 Audi. And that's a pretty good first car. If I were to get a
Exactly.
2008, I would be like I drove that car earlier today, and it has heated seats, a heated steering wheel. That's still a very nice car. And that was a pretty big decision for me to turn down an Audi. But I still decided to go with the Fiero because I was just, there's something about this one Fiero was the best one we saw. And the guy took $200 off the price because he had to tow it to his house if we weren't going to take it. So it ended up, the collage of pictures car ended up actually being it looked a lot better in person than it did in the pictures that were hard to see. I think we got a pretty good deal on it at the time. And I remember being very excited. We trailered it home, parked it in the garage, and the next day my dad and I started working on it because it needed brakes, it needed tires, but it started right up. And the rest is almost history after that. That was my first car. And
were you nervous? Is it something where you've made that decision now? It's on the trailer, and were you nervous that okay, and I now got to put more money into it to get it up to running, to make sure it stops and just all the fine stuff that's got to go into it? Or did you look at it as I'm going to have fun with this, and I can work on it myself, or I can work on it with my dad, and this car will now be a part of me?
I think it was a bit of me just being completely overwhelmed by I guess I really didn't even know what the car needed. Like my dad said it needed brakes. I don't know what needs brakes means. So it was very overwhelming in that I kind of had to rely on my dad a lot because I don't know what goes into needing brakes. And we ended up I learned what a brake caliper was and learned how to put the brake pads in. And that was the first experience I had on any car. I took the wheels off. I didn't know how to use any air tools. And my dad helped me a lot along the way. And it was just a really interesting experience. That there's a lot that goes into a car. It's not just doing brakes. Or you just drop it off at the shop and they'll do it, but that's no fun. And it was very overwhelming at first. And I think especially with me and my dad putting this work into the car, I think that's kind of what fueled me to actually want to drive it. So we put all this work into a car. Now, it can stop under its own power. It drives. So why wouldn't I want to drive it? We put all this money into it, and it kind of got me excited. This might actually be kind of fun to drive.
And you can say that, you and your dad, you guys did everything yourself. You enjoy it. And, now you can look back at it and say, I did that. And we got the car, and we brought it, in essence, kind of back up to the way it should be. And getting that experience right out of the bat, I mean, that's something too. I mean,
Hmm.
just looking at that, or listening to that, it's like, some people get a car and they're like, okay, well, I'm not really gonna do much to it. I'll take it to my guy at the shop tomorrow, and they do all the work.
Hmm.
But I mean, there's something to say about doing everything yourself. And one, you learn. Two, you get to know the car a lot better, and you can understand the car a lot better as well, and how the things function, and all that fun stuff that comes along with working on cars.
Oh, for sure. And I mean, even now, I'm still learning how to do all that stuff. I've definitely learned a lot more since, and I don't rely on my dad as much, but it took years to kind of get the whole gist of everything. And now that I kind of know a Fiero, like I had to do some work on my truck, and I realized there's some things that are completely different on my truck. I mean, they're obviously two different cars, but like one thing that does the same purpose, it can go together completely differently.
Besides the Fiero, what other hobbies do you have that you said you've got a truck that you also work on, that kind of, you have the know-hows of working on vehicles. Do you have any other hobbies that are outside of the car world, or do you feel that you're part of that car world now, to where that's all that you want to do?
It's definitely a balance. I think if I were to work on the cars too much, I might get a bit frustrated because I almost sometimes need that break. And what I was into before the cars, I was always into animals, and the animal that had really got me, like, that I still really enjoy raising chickens. I've had the chickens since 2013, and they're the one pet I've really come to enjoy. We've had, like all the cats and guinea pigs and fish and everything, and I mean that stuff I enjoyed at the time, but it's the chickens I really like, and I have all of the different breeds, and I know like how to take care of them if they're sick, and they're a very fun backyard hobby for me, and I enjoy the chickens. That's kind of how I have my online, like alias is Fiero Chicken because I like Fieros and I like chickens. But
And like you said, it's always good to have that separation too, because you know constantly working on the cars, or a car, you can get frustrated. And I think, like, for myself, that break from October to April, you can step away from, in essence, that hobby, or and just kind of concentrate on other things that maybe you didn't have time during the show season, or work, toying with the car, taking the car out to shows, or going out of state and stuff like that. So it is good, like you said, to have that balance. So you made your purchase now, and how long before you had the itch to get another one?
I kind of skipped over that part a little bit because before I even got my license, I had a second Fiero. Um, so so basically, I got my first Fiero in April. It was April 25th, 2017, and my grandma used to have a Fiero back when they came out. She said she had a ready, and when she saw my Fiero, she remembered, like, usually when she sees stuff that we have, oh, she wants to get it. Like, I mean, of course. So she saw the Fiero, and then her boyfriend saw that there was like a Fiero listed at the local O'Reilly. So she was like, "Well, let's go check out this Fiero and we can get it for me." And like it was like the perfect thing. Like, so my dad and I went with her to go check out this Fiero. And it was just like it's just like a really random ad. Like, it was a black and white picture of a Fiero just posted at the O'Reilly's. Like, it's just like a really weird place to find a Fiero for sale, I think. And so we looked at this Fiero, and it was listed at $500. So you can imagine what a $500 Fiero looks like. But it wasn't
Hmm.
surprisingly, I mean, for $500, I still think it was a pretty good deal. Like, it looked identical to the Fiero I just got. 87 GT automatic, gray interior, faded paint, spoiler. Like it was pretty much the same thing. I think the only extra option it has is that it has the subwoofer. So we looked at the car and it was in a bit worse shape. The brakes, needed tires. It was a bit more. It was rustier. And my grandma realized, well, this isn't a car you can pay $500 for and start driving. Like it's a big project. She can't really handle that. So my dad said, I convinced my dad. I was like, well, why can't we get it? I mean, it would be a good, parts car. And the deal was, I'll get this car as a parts car, and then by the fall, like I make sure I get all of my parts out of it, and then we'll scrap it by the fall. I mean, easy enough, right? That never happened. I still have that car.
Well, they say once you get one, you have the itch to get another, and then you can get another, and then you get another, and next thing you know, you've got a fleet, and then you have one parts car, and the other ones are all drivable.
I think I hit my limit when I got to my fourth, because then my dad made me sign a contract to not get any more.
But it doesn't stop somebody else from getting one for you, right?
Exactly.
So now you've got 4 now. Okay. So was all that before your license or after your license?
So I had the 2 before my license, and then the other 2 came a year after, but the third one I don't have anymore. That was
so we got 3 remaining.
Yes.
Does each one have its own personality or uniqueness that you would say each one has?
Yeah, absolutely. So my first Fiero, it goes by several names. The main name I call it, like when I'm referring to my car, it's called Greg. That's the car's name. And I don't know why it's called Greg. My friend in high school decided to call it Greg, and it's just been Greg. So it was kind of hard too, because I had the 2 black 87 GT automatics. Like there's really not much you can do to differentiate the 2. So I had Greg, and then the second GT was named Spare, because it was the spare parts car. So Greg has kind of been my, old reliable Fiero. It did the usual, it broke down a couple times with the alternator belt or the ICM, just little things like that where, like a part will fix it and then it was up and driving. I have put 20,000 miles on that car.
Wow.
It's definitely been my most reliable, and I'm sad to say I did drive it for a winter, and it already shows some rust from that, just because it was my only car at the time, and now I have since retired it from the winter driving. I have driven that car to Fiero Rama, I believe, 3 times now, Carlisle twice. So the miles definitely add up from that, and just other various car shows. It's been my most shown car. It's also been the car at this point I've put the least amount of work into. Like, don't get me wrong, it's definitely gone through a bit of a mini restoration. I've tried to, it's my stock Fiero. Like, I don't have any plans to like swap the engine or upgrade the interior. I just think it looks good as is. It still has 70,000 miles now, and I'm just trying to keep it looking nice.
Yeah, that's a good thing too, because one, it's still got the low mileage, and you drive it, and that's that's the fun part of it, and that's what the cars were meant to do, is drive and have fun.
Oh, for sure. And yeah, it's kind of, I wish it was a bit nicer than what it was. Like, it has a bit of a 10-footer paint job. 'Cause when I originally got it, the paint was gone, and that year I got it a paint job at Mako, which I mean is kind of what I can afford, because a real good paint job that can cost thousands of dollars. And I mean, the paint holds up. I mean, it looks good, but it's also not paint that I'm afraid to drive. I mean, it has its rock chips, little scratches, and I try to be careful with it, but I mean, it's just going to happen when you're driving it.
You drive each of those cars equally, or I know when you were just saying is that that's the show car, you drive it quite a bit. Is that the one you just always fall to when you want to go out with it and drive?
I wish I could say yes. I think the hardest part for me for driving them equally is insurance. Insurance in Michigan is horrible, and I pretty much can only afford to insure one at a time. So the Greg has been the one I've insured the most just because it is the most reliable. Like the other two, it's like hard to insure them, drive them a week, and then I'm working on them, so then I'm not driving them at all. And it just doesn't make sense to insure all three. So I'd like to drive them equally, but it's definitely been the first Fiero I put the most miles on. Although I'm hoping that will start to change as I get these other two done, because they've been my biggest projects. And it's also hard to be. I shouldn't really be juggling two projects at the same time. My dad was just complaining earlier. He's like, "You really got to focus on one of these."
Well, that's what happens when you have multiple, not just with Fieros, but when you have multiple, cars and projects. That's your life for a while. That's it is hard to differentiate between the two and say, okay, I'm going to separate and just work on this one. When you look over to the other one, you're like, I'm going to work on that one for a little bit now, and then that's the hobby.
Yeah, and I've put 10,000 miles on spare, because as Greg started to become a better car, I turned to spare as like, oh, I'm gonna fix this one up, and I'm gonna drive this one around. And the more I fixed it up, the nicer it got, and it gets to a point where then it's like too nice to drive. But for a summer, or for a whole year actually, I drove it to work, I drove it to school, and it was actually pretty perfect for it because it had like really faded paint. The interior was like in decent shape. And I guess the worst part about it is that when we bought it, the guy said the engine was rebuilt or something. I don't know exactly what they did, but I've never seen a car leak so many different fluids. I've tried to fix all the leaks. I don't even know where they're coming from at this point. So that car's kind of been on the back burner. But the most memorable experience I had in that car, and that was the last day I ever really drove it because of this. It was 2019, and it was 2020. No, it was 2019, and I was going to school, and it was like a 40-degree day, and I wasn't really thinking much of the roads because it was still 40 degrees out. There wasn't like snow on the ground, but I was going 50 miles an hour, and I drove over a bridge. I did a 360 at 50 miles an hour, avoided hitting the walls of the bridge, avoided hitting other cars, ended up back in my lane. And that was probably the most terrifying experience I've ever had in a Fiero.
I would say so. I think I've seen that video because I think you posted that.
Yep, I'm lucky to have got it on a dash cam.
Yeah, yep, yeah.
That was my fault though, because I changed the axles on the Fiero that past weekend, and it needed an alignment, and I should have gotten an alignment before driving it. And it just went over the bridge and right in a 360.
And you're probably white knuckled after that.
Yeah, I didn't even go to school that day. I called my dad. I was crying. He came and like followed me home and was like, "Yeah, this car needs an alignment." He could see that it was like dog tracking a little bit.
So out of all all the miles that you've put on, besides car shows and out of state car shows, what would you say, or have you ever taken the Fiero to a special occasion? And some people take theirs to dances, to proms. A couple club members have used it as their wedding car. After the wedding, they jump in the car and they go. Everybody tries to have that one special occasion in a car that is either their first car or a car that means a lot to them.
I guess I haven't had too many big of milestones. Like since I've had the Fieros, I took a spare to prom. Yeah, it was to prom, and that was also when it faded paint and stuff. So it wasn't. I didn't even get that many pictures of it just because it didn't look that great. But I took the black one on vacation. My mom and I went to like Assateague Island, and we saw the wild horses in the Fiero, and I mean that was pretty fun. But I have not had any like significant like special occasions yet that I've used with the Fiero. But if I ever get married, I'm definitely gonna make sure they're involved.
When did you start thinking of starting a special project with your Fieros, such as, doing some type of customization or even a modification to the car?
It's been a whole learning process for me, as I said. Like I've learned a lot from my dad. I think the first time I started to get a bit more independent was with Spare, because when I first got it, I didn't touch it for a year just 'cause it was supposed to be a parts car, and I kind of just let it sit. And then I decided that I kind of wanted to like take it apart, and I kind of regret how I took it apart and put it back together, just because there's some things I cut the corners on, and there's a couple of important parts. Like I know that I never put back on there's those supports into the GT rear clip. I never put those back on. They're still in a drawer, and I should have done that. It's just part of the learning experience. So that was the first car. I took it apart completely because it was, rusty. And luckily it's not as rusty as I would have thought. And I like coated the frame, and then I put it back together. And then I didn't like that it looked just like my other Fiero. So the third Fiero I mentioned that I don't have anymore was a silver 86 base model. It didn't have a title. It didn't even have a VIN. It was probably stolen. I don't know. And it didn't have an engine either. So it was very questionable. The only thing that car has really done for me is I took the silver bumper pad nose and the silver hood and put it on Spare. So there's some old pictures floating around of that car where it was kind of a mix matched of parts, like silver nose, silver hood, black body panels. And the bumper pad nose has stayed with the car since it's been completely repainted now. So it still has the bumper pad nose, the GT clip, but it's definitely come together where at least matches and is all one color now. But that was like the first car I really started to take apart. And like I said, mistakes were made, but I think I've learned from those. And compared to some of the projects I've since taken on, that doesn't even seem like that big of a deal now.
Are you still working on the cars as far as adding more customization stuff to them, or just working on them a little bit more for yourself to, again, get to know the car a little bit more and see what you can and may want to come up with in the future?
Yeah, my biggest projects are what's happening currently. And so my black car that's on the back burner, it's pretty much complete by my standards. It drives, it's reliable. But my biggest project is my third Fiero, the 88. That's the one I've done the engine swap on, and currently what I've been working on this winter is I stripped all the body panels off of it because I found a DGP IMSA kit for it last year that I picked up from Texas with my dad. So the goal is to get this wide body kit on this car, and I have no idea what I'm doing, but I'm learning as I go. I'm not really much of a body person, but I don't have the money to pay for a shop to do it. So I have to figure it out, and I'm gonna try to do it as best as I possibly can.
I would assume, somebody within the Fiero community has done this before. They should, if they're meant for the Fiero, they should be able to be bolt right on, I would assume.
Yeah, so it did come off of a Fiero, and it's more of just the whole rear clip is like one section, so that I'm determined that must go on first. The car was painted like an ugly yellow, and the paint is very hard to get off. And I guess I've been trying to watch the YouTube videos and stuff, and I don't want to just start going into sanding it. And I know I have to sand it eventually, but I don't want to just take all this yellow paint off because I know I'm gonna go too far just because this yellow paint is so thick. So I've been peeling that away just with it actually comes off pretty easy with heat gun. So I've tried to get it down to the bare fiberglass, and now it's to the point where it does need to be sanded.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess the biggest challenge I'm kind of stuck on right now is that the kit itself has some cracks. I want to fix those right. And then the mounting points, some of them are missing, like the door panels. I need to transplant the mounting points from the stock door panels on these wide body door panels, and I understand how to do it. I just want to do it right, just because it needs to be in that specific location, or otherwise it's not going to line up, or if it doesn't stick right.
Sounds like that's a pretty hefty project to take on.
Yeah, I'm kind of having some mild regrets. I have a picture of what I want the car to look like. I know it's going to be a long process, and I guess my biggest regret is I just got that car running, and then I took all the body panels off, so now I can't really drive it without the body panels. So I kind of wish I had waited on that step a little bit.
Oh, worst case, you can put the old ones back on for a little bit.
Yeah, I'm not. I guess I'm not sure. I guess I've since been sidetracked where now spare is my priority, and I'm working on an engine swap in that one. I'm hoping to have that ready for Carlisle.
Is that the one that you brought down to Fiorama?
This past Fiorama, I brought down my 88, so that was the North Star, and that's the one I'm doing the wide body on.
Okay.
Yeah, that one's been my most involved car. That I rebuilt that engine twice, and now I think it's
doing everything yourself, especially on a North Star. I mean, that's something to be very proud of. What made you think of doing a North Star conversion?
that was another thing. I kind of stumbled into it and ended up, like you stumble into something and then something good comes out of it. That whole ordeal first started in 2018. I was still like kind of on a high from the 35th. I thought that was so cool. And then I was at my first Fiorama, and there's so many cool cars there. I was like, well, all these cars are so cool. I just have my black GT and a parts car. And I was like in awe at all these cars. So I remember being in the hotel room that night, and I was on Facebook, and there was a post about some stuff for sale, and this guy had a parts car for sale, and I contacted him because I read through the messages yesterday because I didn't really understand what I was thinking. I wanted to buy the fastback clip off of him, even though I had two fastbacks. I'm assuming I really liked the PPG Fieros back then. I'm assuming I wanted this fastback clip so I could cut this fastback clip up and try and put notchback taillights in it. That was my thought process. So at least I was smart enough to not hack up my current fastback clip. So I think myself, but I was after this parts car for this fastback clip, and the guy was Charlie, who was selling it, and he lived in Michigan, so it kind of like worked out. And he was like, well, I don't really want to part it out, but it has a North Star in it. And I didn't really know what that really meant. Like it was still getting to know all the engine lingo and stuff. I was like, oh, okay, it's just a whatever that is. Like it's just a V8. I don't know. But he was really trying to sell me this car, and he was like, well, I got it from this guy, and it just needs a few things hooked up. You know how that goes. So I somehow convinced my dad, and this is kind of where the contract thing comes in. I was like, Dad, I really want this car, and we just got to hook a few things up, and it'll be great. So he's like, well, you can get this car, but I don't want any more Fieros or junk in this yard. So I had to sign a contract to be able to get this car because, I mean, my dad's kind of a neat freak. He doesn't like all this stuff, and I can understand that. But so I signed the dumb contract. I haven't gotten any Fieros since, so I guess he won out in the long run. But I remember, so Charlie convinced me to buy this car. He had it listed at 600, and I got it for 5. So I mean, the car itself was worth that in parts, and it had a North Star in it. It was a 93 North Star, which is pretty much the worst one you could put in there. It's just like it was like OBD1, and it's just there were some bugs that needed to work out, and Charlie bought it from a guy who, like I said, just said he needed just a few things hooked up. Charlie didn't work on it. He just had too many projects, was offloading it. So I still got a good deal out of it. So I remember we unloaded the car at the house, and I guess the biggest step was to see if the engine turned over. It had a cradle in it and the North Star mounted, and that was pretty much as far as that went. And we put the car into the garage, and this is the that me and my dad ever dropped a cradle. So we don't have a hoist, so we were using jacks. We didn't even have a cherry picker either at the time. And of course the car fell while it was in the air, and a jack went through the rear clip. So that was fun. Nobody got hurt. The car wasn't damaged aside from the body work, but that was a bit of an experience. And we got the engine out, we got the cradle out, and we tried to turn the engine over, and it wouldn't turn over at all. And I opened up the valve covers on it, and they were just rusty. Like the whole inside of the head and everything was just rust. Like it wasn't even something you could fix. Like obviously the car, somehow the engine had flooded, and it was beyond repair. So at this point,
Was
like
it, you were probably thinking, hopefully it's not seized then too, right?
yeah, it was.
Ugh.
So, but again, I still really didn't know what the whole engine swap process was. So I was kind of stumbling along through this whole thing. Like, I mean, especially with the North Star, that's not really one you'd want to start out with. Like, I mean, I was learning as I was going along, and I posted about the car on Pennox, and there was a guy in Canada who had 2 North Stars for sale and some various parts for Fiero because he was going to do a North Star conversion. And so my mom and I road tripped up to Canada, and it was like way up there, Canada. Like it was like 3 hours into Canada, and that's as far as I've ever gone to Canada. So my mom and I went up there towing a little trailer, and we met this guy, bought these engines, bought the transmission, and the worst experience was getting back in the US. They had us get out of the car, searching everything. It was pretty terrifying. I wasn't even sure if we'd get back in with whatever they thought we were carrying, but we made it back in, and we made it. My mom likes to make trips out of these things. So we went to Niagara Falls, which was fun, while I was hauling around 2 North Stars. It was a whole ordeal, but it was a lot of fun. And so now that I had these 2 engines, I guess what next? So I had my dad's friend, Mr. Eric, come over and check them out, and he like kind of helped me pick out which was the better engine. One was a 95, one was a 96. We went with the 96. That was OBD2, and it looked clean. It supposedly had 100,000 miles or something, but it turned over, and that's kind of what we were after. And if not for Mr. Eric, I don't think this project really would not have gone anywhere, because he at that point offered, he's like, well, we should like tear down this engine and make sure this one's good. And he has a heated shop that he does. He has his own fabrication company he runs out of, and it's just a couple miles up the road. And he said, you can just bring the engine over and I'll help you rebuild it at my shop. So this is a whole new experience to me, to like tear down an engine and all that. And he helped me along the process, like tearing it down. And that wasn't even the hard part. The hardest part was putting it back together, because that matters a lot more with like, the bearings and the clearances and like all the torque specs. Like, you don't torque one bolt down, you might blow up your engine, which kind of happened, which is why I had to rebuild it a second time. But it was, so that was 2018. I got the engine then. It was a 2-year project, and it was 2 years to get it running. So it was like I said, a whole ordeal. The first step was, tearing down the engine. We rebuilt it. I bought like all new bearings, all new gaskets, all new seals. We just reused like the pistons and stuff. And he showed me how to like clean up the block. We had to like deck the block and drill it out for the North Star head studs, because North Stars are well known for blowing head gaskets, and the only way to fix it is with the head stud kit North Star Performance cells. So I splurged and bought that, and eventually we got the car together. And the first time around was very tricky, because when I got the car, nothing was hooked up. The only thing the engine was in the car, and it was on the cradle, and that's as far as it was. Nothing else was hooked up. So we had to make a custom fuel system, make custom cooling system, make a custom electrical routing. Like, it was very overwhelming, and I could definitely do it now if I could do it over again, like with what I know now. But at the time, I had no idea what I was doing. I mean, my dad was a huge help, Mr. Eric. I mean, without his custom fabrication skills, he helped me, like route the cooling system and stuff. And it was just like kind of eye-opening, like all the stuff that goes into it. But there was an important step I missed, and that was putting in a bolt within the timing chain cover. And because I didn't, it was just like a oversight, I guess. And because I didn't put this one bolt in, it didn't allow oil to get to the top of the motor because it was flowing out this bolt hole. I'm trying to remember what specifically it was called, but it was within the timing area. So we eventually got the car running, and it ran good for a little bit. Then it started to have a tick, and there started to be some metal flakes, and it wasn't looking too good. So we have had to pull it out again. I had to rebuild it another time because of this one bolt didn't allow oil, which is really important to the heads, especially in a dual overhead cam motor. And Mr. Eric was able to help me save the heads because he had to like remachine the cam lobes in order to, otherwise they wouldn't work because they kind of ate away a little bit. So we got the engine together a second time, and now it runs. It has oil pressure. We made sure it has oil pressure. That's a pretty big deal, and it was a kind of a costly mistake on my part. But it's now together. All the systems work in it. It just needs miles on it to make sure it's gonna last. I only have put 200 miles on it. It only became drivable not even a year ago.
I'm trying to remember. Did you wind up trailering it down to Fiorama then?
Yes, and it was a good thing I did because at Fiorama, like the Fiorama was the first time I ever drove it because we got the exhaust done the night before, and I never drove it because it was on Mr. Eric's lift. So Fiorama was the first time I drove it home, but the Fiorama was the first time I drove it like on a road where it was like street legal, technically. Not, I don't know if it really was though. And it wouldn't drive very well under power. Like it was, so we went, my boyfriend and I went to O'Reilly's at Fiorama and got a fuel pressure unit, and we had to tape the window. We're driving it around, and it had no fuel pressure, and even in the park, completely black, clogged with rust, which is odd because I had that gas tank professionally redone. So it was, wasn't good. There was a bunch of rust, and as it turns out, I guess the gas tank was so shot that must have been rust in the baffling. And when I got home, I dropped it, and that is what caused my fuel issues because there was so much rust. It was clogging up the fuel filter, and it wasn't getting fuel. So then it also was expensive because I had to get a new fuel pump because I was worried about damaging like my brand new injectors, my brand new fuel lines. So it was a whole production, but I now sourced a good gas tank, and it seems to have fuel pressure. It seems to have oil pressure. I just have to drive it.
Just by listening to that, I'm like, I don't know if I could ever do that. I give you tons of props. That's awesome. Hands on like that, hands down, props to you. Congratulations. And hopefully, you can drive it. That's, the end result. But that's the one you're looking at putting the wide panels on, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think once you get those on and get everything done to what you imagine it, I think that car is going to be a showstopper.
I hope so. That's my plan. And it's, like I said, I've kind of stumbled my way through it. But, with the help of my dad, with the help of Mr. Eric, my boyfriend, it's come a long way. I can definitely see my vision for it. And I've learned a lot. And I'm definitely still learning. Like, even just, I've rebuilt that engine twice. And I could definitely do it again, but I would still be looking up how-to guides on how to put certain things together just because there is so much that goes into anything.
But doing it yourself, you self-teach yourself, and two, you learn a lot. So if something does happen, you already have the know-how to fix it, and you don't have that fear of dropping that engine again to work on it. That's something that a lot of people do have, is if something goes wrong with the engine, I don't want to do that. I don't want to drop that engine. That's the last thing I want to do. But once you get that first one out of your system and you see like, okay, this is not that hard to work on, or, okay, now that I can see it out of the car, I can understand it a lot better. And I mean, unfortunately, you had to do it a couple times, but you, like you said, if you had to do it again, you're comfortable with doing that again.
Hmm. Yeah, I've learned a lot, and I've made mistakes. I blew up my engine. I it's been costly, but it's been fun. I mean, I've had that car since 2018. It's been a 4-year project, 2 years just to get it even running, which I thought would never happen. And then just the feeling of driving it on the road, like it was a really cool experience to know, like, it wasn't just like a little engine swap. I mean, the engine was torn down, and I've put every bolt back together on the engine, whether that's good or bad. It was bad the first time, but I'll admit the mistakes on that one, and I just I know I'm gonna have that car for a very long time, and it's been cool to, like, watch it go from being a parts car that Charlie wanted to scrap to being something that's actually, I mean, pretty cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And again, I give you a lot of props for that, because I don't know if I could do that. I had a 3800 sitting in the garage for I don't know how many years, and I kept looking at it. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to do that this winter. I'm going to do it this winter. I'm going to do it this winter. My number one fear was dropping the engine and putting a new engine in, and it not working. And then you go back to like, okay, should I have even touched it? And so my head, I just never did. And eventually I had to get rid of the engine because it traveled with me through 3 houses, and I'm like, yeah, I'm not going to take it for another move. So I eventually just got rid of it. But I mean, knowing and on how to do that, again, I give you props. That's awesome.
Thank you.
So going back, we're gonna go backwards for a little bit. What was when did you first start getting involved with the Fiero community and the Michigan Club and car shows in general? Then, now that you've had the Fieros for a while, you've done a major project. When did you notice, or when did you kind of go out and see that there's other people like you that do the engine swaps, or are in a car club and do shows and cruise nights?
So when I first got my Fiero, we would, go to like the local cruising and stuff. There were actually, a couple Fieros or two, but not nobody that was in a club, and they weren't like, they weren't like Fiero community members. And so the first like experience I had with the Fiero community is we went to the Michigan Fiero Club meeting, which was really close at the time. Like, it was, maybe 10, 15 minutes away, and just the next city over, which, and I mean, for as big as Michigan is, that was a pretty reasonable distance. So I would take my mom, and we would go, and she enjoyed like going out to eat dinner, and she ended up making a lot of friends there. And the Fiero Club is very welcoming. And I think it was also because, I was a younger girl, like showing up at a car club meeting. Like, I mean, there's still nobody else like that who does show up to those in the Michigan Club, at least. And they were all very welcoming to me, and I learned a lot just from talking to them. They helped me source some parts, and they're the ones that kind of showed me that like Fiero shows exist. Like, I didn't, really know that that was even a thing. And in 2017, I really didn't do that many shows, but it was 2018 when the 35th was coming around. I didn't really know the significance of it at the time. Like, it's like, oh, it's just, another car show. I didn't really realize that you have to wait every 5 years for one of those events. And so, my mom and I planned that trip. That was the first major car trip to, like, yeah, we're gonna drive all the way to Illinois. It was, I think, a 6-hour drive. Like, that was the farthest I've ever gone in a car. And so we went with the Michigan Fiero Club. So that was also my first time like caravanning with, a bunch of Fieros. That was a pretty cool experience. Like, you're not just driving by yourself. You're with all these other cool Fieros you get to look at the whole drive. Like, that was really fun. And now that I had some friends within the Michigan Fiero Club, it wasn't as like overwhelming going to the 35th because I didn't know anybody. And I would like hang out with them. I remember playing like card games in the hotel lobby. And like I said, it wasn't as overwhelming because I at least knew some people there. And it was at the 35th I started to like, I met some other young Fiero owners because in Michigan, there was nobody else. It was just me. I was the youngest in the club, and I didn't have any friends that are my age who liked Fieros. And at the 35th, I met three other young men. They were all like, within a couple of years of my age. I was 16 I was 17 at the time. And we I didn't really like get to know them at first. I'm not the most outgoing person. And it was Larkin who he's still really active in the Fiero community. He kind of brought us all together and we would like it was like the second or third night we would hang out late in the parking lot by our cars and just the younger crew would like talk because I mean we weren't really involved with the older members yet. So it was just like us in the parking lot and we were talking about our cars and it was there we started the junior Fiero owner group chat. So we just had like a messenger group chat, which sadly has kind of died down significantly since, but for a couple of years it was very active and we had all met at the 35th and we would keep in touch and started out with the four of us and the group chat now I think has like a dozen members, but like I said, it's not as active. But ever since the 35th, even just on like the Facebook or Instagram, I've definitely seen a significant increase in younger people because back in 2017, I could only name four people that were around my age. And it's actually kind of amazing to see like all these younger people that are into these cars now.
It is, and I 100% agree with you. I've been involved in almost 25 years, and just looking at the group coming in now, it's like, 5 years ago, almost 10 years ago, it's like you're looking like, what's the next generation that's going to keep the Fiero moving? And back then there really wasn't anybody or any group, and it was your older group. And even like some of the things that we've noticed in N.I.F.E is we 5-10 years ago we had, I think our average age for members was in their 50s, and now we're seeing that shift and we're seeing the average age in their 20s, 30s, and younger. So it's really nice to see that the younger groups are getting into the Fiero. And it could be one of two things. It could be that to them, the Fieros are inexpensive. It's a sharp looking car and they're easy to work on if need be. So there's a lot of factors, and maybe the Fiero is jumping out of that 80s style car to being more of that next generation friendly kind of car. And, we look at it as you guys are that generation to keep the Fiero alive. And we'll talk about it in a little bit, but last year's Midwest Fieros competition, the Fiero owners younger than their cars, that was a great turnout, and it meant a lot to a lot of the older groups and the older members, that there is a group that is preserving that, and it's, like I said, it's, it's good to see that younger generation is getting involved.
Yeah, I agree. Even just seeing like, I mean, there's different reasons to like the Fieros. I mean, you can just like having a stock Fiero and you're still going to be welcomed in at the show, or you could have a all-out modified Fiero and you're still going to be welcomed at the show. Like you can do what you want. They're easily modifiable, or you could work on them stock, and that's fine too. And it's just cool all of what you can do with them, and there's something for everybody.
There is, exactly. So you've gone to the 35th, you've enjoyed it. You've gone to Fiorama, you've gone to Carlisle. What other shows within the Midwest or outside of the Midwest that you would be interested in attending. We've got Back to the 80s in Minnesota. You've got the Tyler Shipman Show in Minnesota. The Heartland Show, which is coming back this year in Iowa, I think just south of Cedar Rapids. You've got the Michigan Show. You've got the Kansas City Show. And there's I think Georgia's got a show, but then Carlisle's coming up again back in June. Do you see yourself expanding from the shows that you've already gone to?
I say I would like to. Like every year, I say, "Oh, I'm gonna go to the Dells this year or back to the '80s."
Oh yeah, I forgot about the Dells, and that's coming up too.
Yeah, just like something different. But Carlisle has been the farthest show I've like regularly attended, and I really enjoy that one, and that's definitely one I want to keep on my list. And I kind of have to juggle it a little bit, where like some of these farther shows would be fun, but that's more time I have to take off of work, and I kind of have to have that balance where I can only take so much time off, or I don't want to like sacrifice going to Carlisle or Fiero Rama. I also need money too, where I can't just keep taking time off because I need money to go to shows or work on my cars. So I really would like to attend like back to the '80s or the Dells. It's just those are getting really far. I think the hardest part about me for going out west is going around Chicago. Like the lake is always in the way, and you always have to go south and around. And it's just that drive is very daunting.
Well, I would say, if you did have a chance in the future, the Dells is a must. The group that goes up there is very unique, and it's almost turned into a family show. And because you do have a lot of people that go every year, but it's very much like Fiorama, where you have that connection with everybody that goes to the show. I would love to make it up to the back to the 80s. Time is more of an issue on my end, but I've heard nothing but great things on that show. Same with the Tyler Show. Gone out to Iowa numerous times. Again, that's a very down to earth. Again, kind of Fiero family oriented. I've been up to this was many years ago, the Frankenmuth show for that Michigan's put on numerous times. And then my goal is to get out to Carlisle this year, and it's not with the Fiero, but just getting out there. So sometimes you do have to pick and choose, and maybe one year you do these two, or next year you do this one, or it's kind of once you get to know people, everybody will try to get you to get to their show. And Wayne Gibb out east, he tries to get to all the Midwest shows. There's a couple of guys down south that try to get to all the Midwest shows, and it takes a lot of time, it takes money, but you talk to them and they'll say it's well worth it. It is something, if you have time, money, it's definitely well worth going to all those events. So looking back at last year, you did the Michigan show, and then did you know about the Midwest Fiero competition going into the Michigan show?
Yeah, I was aware.
What were your initial thoughts on that? Was it interesting? An interesting turn for a competition? Was it unique to you? Like, what were your thoughts when you first heard about what we were doing as a organization?
No, I definitely thought it was neat. Like when I first really heard about the competition, that was I think 2 years ago with the best woman-owned Fiero, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
And like that, I thought thought that was pretty cool, and that was at the Michigan Fiero Club. I was like, well, I might actually have a chance, and it went to Pam, which it was well deserved, and that brought her. I think that brought her out to Fiorama that year,
Yeah. Yep.
and so like I was really happy for her, but then I was at Fiorama, I got that, and I was I was very excited about that because it's especially with my little 87, my black 87, that's that car I don't really consider that impressive compared to everybody else's built out Fieros or even just ones that like some of the stock cars are more optioned out than that car, and it doesn't really stand out in its own way. And I was very happy to even just like be qualified and to win that award at Fiorama. Like that was a big deal to me, and I think it's a lot of fun, and it definitely encouraged me to go back to Fiorama. And then it's cool to see all these other people who like you don't usually see at the show who were brought out by the award.
Did do you think that as an organization, not only the Midwest Fiero clubs, but all of the other Fiero clubs, that spotlighting a female-owned Fiero or a younger generation, do you think that's well worth it, being part of the Fiero community? I mean, for the Fiero community as a whole to come up with those types of, maybe call it a competition, maybe it's something that we're spotlighting I mean, you look back 50, 60, 70 years ago when, the car show industry or car show world was all guy orientated, gearheads. And it was the spouses and the girlfriends that just sat there next to them as they were talking about their car, and 50 years later, you've got now women owning show cars and working on cars, and the younger generation. And what does it make you feel good that these are spotlighted now?
Yeah, I would definitely say so. I mean, sometimes like I've mentioned, I am a bit introverted where it is kind of like I feel like I have been picked out a little bit just because I'm a girl into Fieros, which has led me to a lot of cool experiences. I think it's helped me get to know more people in the community and be a lot more. I'm a lot more involved in the community now with I'm like the ambassador for the Michigan Fiero Club for the Midwest Fiero Club, and I'll listen in on their meetings, and it's cool to hear about like the plans for the 40th, and you be able to have my input. And I think by having these like certain awards, it's made me more recognizable, made me more involved. Where it's not just about winning the award. It's like, oh, well, I'm gonna meet these other people too because they know me, I know them, and it's brought me together to meet like a lot more people, and I feel a lot more like welcomed by it too because I'm like, oh well, these people do recognize me and they appreciate my car or something.
And like I said, I've said it many years, and again over the past many months. When you join into the Fiero community, you become a family member, and I don't know of anybody that has ever done anything that would really piss somebody off. I mean, everybody helps everybody. Look at the three incidences that we had at Fiorama last year. We had a steering column break. We had my car die just out of nowhere, and we had I think it was a antifreeze leak, and everybody that weekend helped everybody. And it was the first time that we've ever given out 3 hard luck awards, because it's not really a hard luck, but it was also helping hands too. And that's what makes the Fiero community really unique, is that everybody goes out of their way to help everybody that has a problem. So
Yeah, because I had my North Star there, and while I didn't like necessarily have hard luck, it was more just like like little frustrating things. Like I was in the parking lot, everybody else was in the parking lot, people were working on the cars, some were sitting around cars, and we would just be like asking each other for advice, like, hey, what do you think's wrong, or can you come check this out, or this and that, and like that's kind of helped what influenced us to go to the parts store, and like, you know, we got like a fuel pressure regulator, and just like, you know, spitballing ideas back and forth, and I mean, just like having a discussion while I was working on a car in the parking lot, and it's just like little memories like that where like you don't get that
Mhm.
experience at any other car show.
Exactly. So, you know, you brought it up, and you know, there's been many announcements over the past, I would say, 4 weeks on it. The 40th is going to be in your backyard.
Hmm.
How excited are you about that?
I am beyond excited, and it's definitely putting the pressure on me where I have a deadline to get my cars done and drivable because they are all going to be at the 40th. That is my ultimate goal right now.
That's awesome. And, you know, it's going back to the birthplace of the Fiero in Pontiac, Michigan. And I mean, what a way to celebrate that, you know, and get as many Fieros that, you know, that you have, and that you can get there, because it, you know, it's going to be, you know, a show-stopping show. You know, I think right now we're early talk. We're probably around maybe 300 again. I mean, we were at like 230, 240 at the 35th. I think we're going to come close, if not have more, because again, you know, we're going to draw people more from the east as well, because we're going to be in that upper neck of the woods up there too. So
Yeah, and there's definitely a lot of hidden Fieros in Michigan. Like there's a significant amount that aren't in the club, and I'm hoping that that will bring some of them out to maybe, you know, become more involved in the community, to see it's not like any other car community. So I'm hoping that we're gonna generate a hype and get a lot of people out there. I'm already very excited for it.
yeah, and we're just over a year and just under a year and a half away,
Yeah,
right around a year and a half.
it's coming up quick.
Yep. So before we close out the podcast here, is there anything that you would want to add? You know, any other uniqueness that that draws you to the Fiero even more?
I guess I'm still learning something new every day about the Fieros, and just trying to work on my cars to get them what I want to be. And I'm also still so inspired by like what everybody else can do with the Fiero, because each one is so unique. I I've had a lot of help on mine, and I'm gonna continue to get help because there's a lot that goes into it, and there's nothing wrong with, you know, asking questions or getting help from somebody else. Because it is a lot. Um, my dad's been a huge help. Mr. Eric's been a huge help. Um, Fieros have changed my life, just my social life, my hobbies, what I put my money into. I met my boyfriend Paul through Fieros. He has his own Fieros, and he's been a huge help with, you know, like we kind of work with each other to get each other parts, and I'll go help him work on his Fieros. He helps me work on mine. Um, it's overall it's been just an amazing experience just since 2017. It's what, 5 years now, and time flies, and they've been a part of my life almost every single day, and I'm still looking forward to the future. And it's just been kind of surreal sometimes.
I would say, you know, you're going to surpass that 15, 20, 25-year mark of being part of the Fiero community very fast, because it does go very fast. I mean, I still remember the July of '97 when I traded in my Mustang for a Fiero, and everybody was like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "Hey, to me, it's my Corvette." You know, I mean, it was a sporty little two-seater, and you know, who would have thought? You know, 20 some years later, I still have it, and I've, you know, I like you, I've put so much, you know, blood, sweat, and tears into that car to make it my car. And you know, a lot of people, you know, that do the work and can say that and say that is my personality in that car. That is my blood, sweat, and tears in this car. And people respect that. and that those are the stories that people listen to and love to hear at shows or just in chatting in general. And that's what makes these cars unique, is everybody has done a special touch to their car that makes it unique to them.
Mhm.
So before we close it out here, can people expect to see 1-2 of the cars around the show circuit this year? And what shows are you kind of looking at hitting this year?
So I already have on my list, I already signed up for Carlisle. I'm definitely going to Carlisle. I'm definitely going to Theorama. It's already looking like it's going to be a busy year. Those are my 2 main shows that I'm for sure going to hit. As I said, I always say I'm going to go to the Dells or something. I'm just not sure. I'm hoping I have my black Fiero on backup as, my old reliable, but I'm hoping to get my blue one sorted out where it can go to a show, because it has a really nice body. It's just that the engine, like I said, leaks all sorts of fluid. So I'm hoping to throw in a 3800 in it and just get it up and running. I've been kind of working on that all winter, and it'll be a significant upgrade from the little V6 in it. And I just that car needs to get up and going, because I've not really driven it since 2019, and it's just been sitting. And I'm hoping to get that one out to shows, because I've only taken my black one I've only driven my black one to the shows. I've taken like the North Star to Fiorama, but it's definitely a different experience to drive it out there and be able to like cruise around. And I'm really excited for Carlisle. That's my deadline to get this blue one up and running.
Yeah, and they're saying Carlisle is going to be another big show as it was last year. So, it's that show's come a long way too. I give
for
props
sure.
to Mafoa on that one. I mean, they've done a great job on that show.
I agree. They keep me coming back.
And they keep drawing new people too.
Yeah, especially in the past few years. Like, I mean, the show field pretty much doubled since I started going a couple of years ago with the amount of Fieros. It's kind of crazy.
Yeah. Well, each club, like I said, has a uniqueness of how they put on their show, and they do a great job. Every club does great at their shows, and that's what makes people want to go back. And it's that draw that keeps people coming too. So, all right, well, thank you. Very, very great conversation, and thank you for joining us on FieroCast tonight. And we hope to see you around at many shows this year and the 40th next year. So again, thank you very much for joining me tonight.
Thank you for having me. I had a lot of fun.
All right. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode of FieroCast with chatting with Kristina. Again, thank you to Kristina for joining us tonight. And we look forward to hearing and seeing you at many Fiero events this year. Again, this podcast was produced by myself, Mike Croyer, and is a production of the Northern Illinois Fiero Enthusiasts. Thank you for joining me tonight. I am your host, Mike Croyer, and thank you for listening to the newest episode of FieroCast. This is episode 28, and it is the only podcast dedicated to the Pontiac Fiero and the Fiero community. If you would like more information or have any ideas for future FieroCasts, you can email me at mkroyer@fierofocus.com. Remember to keep Fieroing, and good night, Fiero owners, wherever you are.